Welcome to my class. You guys um, can actually leave yourself unmuted for a few minutes because I'm going to go over everything we've talked about and would love for you to be able to help me review the things that we've learned. So we're just going to start from the top. What are the top 3 things that feed conflict?
Assuming that you're right.
Correct.
Assigning blame.
Assigning blame, yes.
And assuming intention.
Good job, Teresa. Good job, Clay. Yes, those are the triple A's. Acting like you're right, assigning blame, and assuming intention. Then we've got our conflict styles. And everyone knows their conflict style at this point, I hope. If you don't, we can talk about that. But we've got the avoiding, which is like delaying the conflict. We've got the competing, which is to win the conflict. The accommodating, which is to yield in conflict. Compromising, which is just making everyone halfway happy in conflict. And then collaborating, which is trying to meet everyone's needs within the conflict. Last week, we talked about learning to listen. We discussed the approaching the conflict from the third story. Can anyone tell me what the third story is?
Jerry says outside of yourself.
Yes, it's that neutral narration of what's happening within the conflict. It's acknowledging that there's more than one side to the conflict. It's not your side or the other person's side. It's the overarching thing. It's again, Freeman narrating what's happening in the conflict, seeing both people's perspectives. We talked about taking a stance of curiosity, which feels pretty self-explanatory. You come in wanting to understand why someone is upset. And so instead of assuming you understand what the problem is, you need to ask why. Why is this a problem? Help me understand what you're saying, that kind of thing. So that curiosity, inquiring, wanting to know why, help take the edge off of some conflicts. We had 3 listening skills. Does anybody remember what they are?
Carrie's eating too. Can you sit fine?
Inquiry.
Inquiry.
Paraphrasing.
Paraphrasing.
And acknowledging.
And acknowledgement. That's right. Inquiring, asking questions to get to the root of the conflict. That's taking that stance of curiosity. Paraphrasing, saying what you think you hear them saying. What I hear you saying is blah, blah, blah. And then acknowledging, giving legitimacy to how the other person feels. You know, we get attacked with conflict sometimes and we're not ready to discuss it, and that's okay. What's important is letting the person know. So if you cannot be in the right headspace to approach this conflict, you need to communicate that. You need to say why you talk about it, and then give another time to do it so you don't just leave that person hanging. It's a lot of talking that we're talking about doing here in the learning to listen section, but the talking is for the purpose to understand, and we listen so that we can understand. But that brings us to tonight's discussion, which is creating conversation and communicating in conflict. Do you like that alliteration? I was very proud of that alliteration. Creating conversation and communicating in conflict. Just rolls off the tongue. Oh man, I'm so brilliant sometimes. Just kidding. Okay, so I don't know about you guys, but even for me, a semi-seasoned professional when it comes to conflict, whenever I am suddenly thrown into a conflict or confronted with one, my mind just goes, it just gets all, it gets all jumbly. My body actually turns hot and then cold and then hot again. Like I have all these physical reactions to it. My gut isn't to immediately be like, well, I hear what you're saying here. Can you explain to me why you feel that way? That's not going to be my gut. My gut's going to defend myself and try to win the conflict if I can, because that's just kind of, I think, a little bit of our human nature there to protect ourselves. And, you know, we like to win. We like to outwit. But the goal in any conflict should be to express what you feel the problem is and why you see the situation that way and how you feel about it. It is not trying to win. It is not trying to outwit the other person. It is trying to get to the source of the problem,
Solve it.
find why the situation is that way, and figure out how you feel about it. Then be able to say that in a clear and assertive way. So like I said, it's not easy, but it is doable. And I'm going to help you with that a little bit tonight. This will be a lifelong practice, but we can do it. I believe in all of you. Self-reflection is probably one of the most important things when it comes to learning how to communicate with clarity and power. And what I mean by with clarity and power, I mean, clarity, that is self-explanatory. Say what you are saying in a way that they can understand it. But the power isn't to like overwhelm or overcome or over assert yourself. The power is in knowing how you feel and being able to communicate it clearly. So those two go hand in hand. Being able to communicate clearly gives you power over the conflict and the situation that will allow you to hopefully implement some of the other steps that we've talked about. First and foremost, you cannot communicate with clarity and power if you don't believe your opinion or side of the story is valid. If you don't believe that what you have to say is important, you're not going to be able to communicate it well. I mean, we are all equal in the eyes of God. We have all been created in God's image. Our passions and our ability to express them and our loves and those things, those are all equal because those are gifts from God. We should never feel that our voice is undeserving of being heard, is unworthy to be heard. Your views, when you're in conflict with someone, especially someone that you care about, your views and feelings are just as important as theirs are. This is one reason why self-awareness is so important, because oftentimes you'll need to have a conversation with yourself before engaging in a difficult conversation with someone else. I don't know if you guys do this or not, but I am really awesome at closing an argument awesomely 3 days after it already happened. Like you come up with that perfect zinger of an ending to whatever kind of conflict you're having. And the, oh yeah, well, so does your mom, or, you know, something like that. Just kidding, Mom, not you, but just some kind of thing in there. I think about conflict when I have a conflict with someone or a misunderstanding or any of those kinds of things, and I'm thinking about it over and over again. I think of all these awesome things that I wish that I had said. Do I say them? Rarely. Am I getting better at saying them? Slightly. But it's because I think about them a lot. That process of going over a conflict or a misunderstanding or something like that that's just happened, that is taking you down that trail of self-awareness. Because when you are thinking about what you should have said or what you wish you had said or how you wish things had gone, you're giving yourself words and statements that you can use in the future. It's part of working that muscle a little bit. Some questions that you can ask yourself before, if you have to approach someone that you know you're going to have a difficult conversation with them, or if you are thinking about a difficult conversation you just had, some things that you can ask yourself are, what does this disagreement mean to me? Do I feel worthy to voice my opinion? How does this person's statement make me feel? Or how did what this person did, how did that make me feel? What impact does this have on my self-esteem, my well-being, my future? Why is this bothering me? Why is this important? These are some things that you can kind of ruminate on as you're preparing yourself to have a difficult conversation, or as you're training yourself to be better at a difficult conversation in the future. Knowing why we feel the way that we do allows us to more easily voice our side of the story without blame or attack. It's like a muscle. You work your muscles every day so that when you need them, they do what they're supposed to do. Practicing self-reflection is working that muscle. You keep that in shape so that when there is a conflict, you can more easily bring up your side of the story in a way that is clear and with power. A side note on that I think one of the things that people maybe often don't think about when they are trying to avoid a conflict or not express how they feel about it is you are actually robbing that person of a part of yourself. When you fail to share what's most important to you, you detach yourselves from your important relationships. I mean, think about yes, Gary? Oh, I mean, think about your most intimate relationships, those relationships that have lasted the longest, the ones that have been the most important to you. Those have most likely faced a little bit of refinement by fire in one way or the other. I mean, that conflict and those growing pains that you have in relationship with other people makes that relationship stronger. But when you don't deal with those things that bother you or the things that they do that hurt your feelings, you're robbing them and yourself of an actually better and deeper relationship. Excuse me, I've been yelling at my kids too much today.
Conflict.
Just kidding.
Could you describe or define, or what are we talking about when we say power? I mean, like when I think of power, I think I'm going to win or something.
Right. So this is almost like it's a power that you get from respecting yourself. Maybe confidence speaking with clarity and confidence would be a better way of saying it. It's just the power comes in being able to express yourself and not just being bowled over by another person that you have a conflict with. The power comes from knowing who you are, what you believe in, why you stand. So maybe confidence would be a better word to use, because power does sound kind of aggressive, which we want to avoid if we can, unless sometimes people need a little aggressiveness. They're bullies or whatever, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about something else. But yeah, confidence, clarity and confidence is the goal that we want to be able to speak for ourselves and on behalf of ourselves. So how do we actually do this? I'm glad you asked, because I will tell you. Learning to express yourself, as I said, is a lifelong process, And it's not going to feel natural at first, especially if you fall into that avoiding, accommodating style of conflict. Being able to express yourself is going to feel like you're being mean or aggressive. And really, that's probably not the case. It's just you learning the power of your voice and the importance of your voice. So when you are self-reflecting, when you are trying to prepare to have a difficult conversation with someone, you need to start with what matters the most. That's the first thing you need to do. Start with what matters the most. What is at the heart of this conflict for you? Now, once you know that, you're going to be able to more easily express that to the other person. But it takes a little bit of time getting to that heart of the conflict. So think about what was done. What was done? How did it make you feel? Why does it bother you? And why is it important to you to talk about? You can't get to the heart of the matter until you answer these questions. You need to know, well, you know what was done because that's the conflict, but you need to know how it made you feel. You need to know why it bothered you and why you feel like it's important to discuss. We'll use this as an example. Let's just say that your spouse always contradicts what you're saying or undermines your authority in front of your kids. So how could we approach that with that person? First of all, ask yourself the question, what was done? Well, your spouse was contradicting you. And how did that make you feel? Well, disrespected, inadequate, insecure, unsupported, I don't know, words like that. How did that make you feel when they undermined you? Why does that bother you? And this is a little harder to get to that why, but why does it bother you that that happens? Well, maybe because you want your kids to see that you and your spouse, I'll be speaking for me. So I want my kids to see that my husband and I are a team, that we work together, that we support one another. And I don't want to set a bad example of that by having us say the opposite things. Why is this important to discuss? Well, because we want to set a good example for our kids. We want to be a team and we need to be able to work together. So how are you going to express this when the time comes to talk to your spouse about it? A lot of times I have found that there's a nice way to something and an attacking way to say something. So we'll start with the nice way. When you do this thing, it makes me feel this way. The reason this bothers me is blah, blah, blah. What is important to me is this thing. So in the context of what your spouse is doing, when you contradict or correct me in front of our kids, it makes me feel like you don't respect me, and I'm afraid the kids will see that too. The reason this bothers me is because I want our children to see that we support each other and that we're on the same side. What is important to me is that they see us as a team. So what you're doing by making those statements is you are not necessarily attacking the other person's actions. You are just giving the other person the results of their actions. When you do this, it makes me feel this way. And the reason it makes me feel that way, the reason this bothers me is because of this. And it's important to me because of this. You are communicating how you feel and how those actions make you feel. Another way that you can express yourself with clarity and confidence is to say what you mean and don't make them guess, which feels like super obvious. Just say what you mean, but it's not obvious. I would argue, especially for Southern Christians, because we're taught to be nice and like inadvertently say what we're trying to say, because if we just come right out and say it, sometimes that's considered too aggressive or not Christ-like or anything like that. But just say what you mean. Passive aggressiveness is almost always going to be easier. It's going to be easier to, so when I say passive aggressive, I mean making a joke or an offhanded comment or body language, doing those things instead to let someone know that you are being bothered rather than just telling them that you're being bothered. Things like your husband just contradicts you in front of the kids. So you say, well, I guess we know who wears the pants in this family, and then walk off in a huff. So, I mean, passive aggressive. Or you say something like, looks like what dad said goes, forget what mom has to say. You're expressing that you're discontented, yet you are not speaking with clarity. You're just expressing that you're frustrated. Comments like that really are probably just going to annoy the other person more than anything. So by bringing it up, but not quite bringing it up completely with clarity, is going to leave you feeling more dissatisfied, because that comment, forget what mom has to say, doesn't solve what's being done, doesn't solve the fact that your spouse is undermining you in front of the kids. Saying that's not going to fix it. And that's going to lead to frustration on your part and neglected feelings, so that the next time it happens, you're probably going to react more aggressively or more angrily or anything like that, because you've just thrown a little kindling in that conflict fire that's already brewing a little bit. Being disappointed that someone isn't reading what you feel to be extremely obvious cues that something is wrong is also going to feed that conflict a little bit. You can't say, okay, if you don't say what you mean or how you feel, then you're not allowed to be mad at them for not understanding you. Does that make sense? If you don't communicate what is upsetting you, then you have removed your right to be mad about it. In a healthy way, at least. And I don't know about you guys, but it's easy to wish that you didn't have to be so specific, that maybe that the other person could just read your mind. Like, I think that would be great, because personally, I find it to be exhausting, constantly having to express myself in a clear and confident way. It takes a lot of energy that sometimes I don't have, but you can only control yourself. And if you're feeling a certain way, it's your responsibility to communicate it. It's not their responsibility to figure it out. So, stop doing the little rigmarole and just like get to the point. There are some good ways to get to the point, and there are some less successful ways to get to the point. One way that does not work very well is what we call easing in. So avoid easing in, like if you're easing into a parking space or something like that. Easing in is you're trying to soften a message by delivering it indirectly through hints or leading questions. So instead of just coming out and saying something, saying you feel a certain way, you ease in. So you'll say, don't you think you're spending too much time fishing? Instead of saying, I feel like you spend too much time fishing. Or you can say, and I am so guilty of the next one. I do this all the time. I don't even realize I'm doing it, but I'll say to Chris, do you want to go get the kids ready for bed? And the answer is no, he doesn't want to, because I don't either, but somebody has to. So I feel like I'm telling him to do it, but in a nice way by asking him if he wants to. But really, I'm not. I mean, I guess that gives him the option to say no. Chris is laughing because, like I said, this happens on the regular. Then I'll have to rephrase it. But hey, do you want to go see why George is banging against the wall? And I mean, I like, okay, now, will you go see why George is banging against the wall? And he will say yes, sarcastically, because he knows what we're doing there. So don't ease in when you're wanting to say something. A real life example too, last time I was teaching this class, Chris received an email from one of our elders' wives, sent out like an email blast that was just talking about a potluck or something like that. And I didn't get the email. I was like, well, that's weird, because I usually get those emails. So Chris had just mentioned it offhandedly, and I was like, that doesn't make sense. So I look at his email, and I see the email, and I see that I'm not on the email list. So I must have got bumped off or something like that. So I'm sending her an email, and I'm saying, and this is what I say, I don't think I'm on your email list. Can you check? Like, this was the email I was about to send. And then I stopped myself, and I was like, wait a second. I know I'm not on the email list because I didn't receive the email. So how can I speak with clarity and confidence in this instead of easing in by saying, I don't think I'm on your email list, but maybe you could check. Just say, I didn't get that email about the potluck. I didn't get that email about the potluck. I must have been bumped off of the list. Can you add me again? Something like that. You're stating what it is and what to do about it. So avoid easing in when speaking with clarity and confidence. Also, don't present your conclusions or opinions as truth. There's a phrase that's used all the time, and it's I just spoke my truth, or that's this person's truth, or that's person's truth. And I feel like that kind of weakens the power of the word true and truth. And so when I'm referring to that, I'm mainly talking about a perspective. But if you bring in your perspective as fact and as the only true thing, you're not going to get anywhere in that conflict. So don't present your conclusions or opinions as truth. This is when you kind of need to remember that third story, how what seems like truth to you might not be truth to them. It's your perspective. Your perspective feels right to you because it's yours. It belongs to you. But on the same hand, their perspective feels right to them because it's theirs. It belongs to them. So both people come into an argument thinking that they're right. Like, you're not going to argue over something that you don't think is right or that you feel like you're wrong about. I guess maybe some people would, but generally speaking, you're not going to argue about something that you're not passionately about or that you think you're not right about. So there's a way to make a statement that without making it the absolute truth fact. Yes, there are absolute truths out there. But I'm talking on a lighter level of approaching conflict here. I'll use this as an example because it's kind of a hot button issue, but people can argue for both sides. So you would say spanking is just plain wrong. It's just wrong. There. I mean, you're not going to be able to have a discussion with that. You're not going to be able to understand why the other person thinks spanking is okay if you just shut it down right there by saying spanking is wrong. You can't say things like, my view is that spanking is wrong, or I believe that spanking is wrong. But when you're going to say those things, you need to share why you feel that way. So you make your statement of what you believe or what you view. Like I view that, my view is that spanking is wrong. So what information do you have that led you to these opinions? Again, we're talking about all these things. This is all part of that self-reflection that we're talking about, so that you are able to give yourself the words that you need. That involves asking yourself a lot of questions and thinking about a lot of things. So what information do you have that led you to this opinion? Or what experiences have you had that make you feel so strongly about this? You could say, I believe that spanking is wrong because I was spanked as a child and feel like it has had an emotional impact on my ability to trust. Or my view is that spanking is wrong because I've read several books which state that spanking is not the most ideal form of discipline. So you're stating how you feel, but you are not omitting the other person's perspective when it comes to that discussion. Because likewise, they could come back with saying, well, I believe that spanking is okay when it's done clearly and in a loving way, and in a way where the kid understands that these are the consequences that you're going to get when you make this choice. So those discussions can be had when you state your perspective as just that, a perspective, and not a fact, and not a hard truth. Another thing that's important to do when trying to speak with clarity and confidence, don't exaggerate what you're saying, especially with words like always and never. You always do this thing. You never do what I want to do. You always blah, blah, blah. You never blah, blah, blah. For example, you always contradict what I say in front of the kids. What is that going to accomplish? When you make that statement, you're immediately putting the other person on the defensive. So you have just taken away an opportunity to be able to express how you actually feel when that happens. A better approach is to proceed as if the person probably doesn't realize they're doing it. So proceed it as if the other person is simply unaware of the impact that their actions have on you. And being the good person that you know they are, they're definitely going to want to change their behavior once they become aware of it. Now, ideally, yes. Always, no. But when you approach a conflict or an argument from that way, when you approach it from the idea that they might not even know that they're doing it, they might not even realize that, to me, it feels like they're contradicting me. To me, they might just be stating their opinion too, because I just stated mine. So when you come into the argument, giving them that benefit of the doubt that they don't actually know what they're doing, it allows for a healthier dialogue between the two of you, because you're not butting heads, you're discussing, you're sharing your views and opinions. I do want to speak for a moment about the benefit of the doubt, because for me personally, in my life, it has always served me well to give people the benefit of the doubt, not just in conflict, but in most things, in things that they do that I don't understand. I always try to
She talking?
give them a more grace-filled reason for why they're doing what they're doing. Giving someone the benefit of the doubt in conflict can be the difference between having a healthy conversation with good results or leaving feeling unheard and angry and attacked. So giving the benefit of the doubt is really important. And the Bible actually speaks on that as well. Philippians 4:8 says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honest, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good rapport or excellent and praiseworthy, think about these things. Now, the context behind this passage is actually about a conflict. It's about a conflict between two church leaders, Paul and Timothy. I guess Paul, did Paul and Timothy write it or just Paul? I think it's, well, you know, they. Says, I appeal to Euodia and Syntyche to agree in the Lord. Yes, I say also to you, true companion, help them. They have struggled together in the gospel ministry along with me and Clement and my other co-workers whose names are in the book of life. So this passage, this focusing on what's true and what's right and what's noble and what's pure, that's not just saying, here's some general advice for how you should view the world. It's not saying you need to be optimistic by only viewing these things. It's actually saying when you see another person, when you are in conflict with another person, come to them focused on those things. You look at that person and you focus on what is true and what is honest and what is right and what is pure and what is excellent and what is praiseworthy. And by doing that, you're humanizing them in a way that will allow for you to love them through that conflict. And hopefully they will be able to do the same for you. Chris and I actually used this verse as our wedding vows. And it is over our headboard in our bedroom. And it's also a memory verse that my mom taught me when I was really young by saying, Anna Jane, you got a thirpliger, is what she said. And those are thirp, true, 8, honest, right, pure, thirp, lovely, agur, admirable, of good report, praise, like, so that's a passage that's particularly special to me. And when I was taught that it was in the context of viewing another person rather than just viewing the world, it actually changed my life a little bit, which was why Chris and I wanted it for our vows, because we want to try to see those things in each other, especially when we're coming to each other angry or in conflict. Before we wrap up, does anyone have any questions or comments? Hindrances? Wise statements? Okay. Well, I want to leave you with this quote. It's by a man named Thomas à Kempis. In the 14th century, he wrote a book called The Imitation of Christ. If you haven't read it, it's not a long book, but it is awesome. It's a really awesome book. And one of the things that he says in it is, try to bear patiently with the defects and infirmities of others, whatever they may be, because you also have many faults which others must endure. If you cannot make yourself what you would wish to be, how can you bend others to your will? You want them to be perfect, yet you do not correct your own faults. We wish them to be severely corrected, yet we will not correct ourselves. What I love about this in the context of conflict is it It speaks to a lot of the things that we've talked about. We only control ourselves. I mean, I believe a very wise person once said, don't focus on the plank in the other person's eye, or the sawdust in the other person's eye when you have a plank in your eye. And it all ties in there. Like, you control yourself. You focus on yourself, you fix yourself, and then kind of move on from there. So that is our class for tonight. Next week, we only have 2 more weeks. We are going to talk about conflict and social media next week. And then the week after that, we're going to wrap up and talk about the positive perspectives of conflict. I'll show you guys again the book that I find to be extremely helpful when having, well, difficult conversations or having a tough conflict. This has helped me and given me a lot of words that I can use to speak with clarity and confidence. And I wish that for all of you.